They know Sports Central. We go over our next schedule preview this offseason, and it's going to be over Ohio State, one of the major national contenders of the 2022 season. This team was dominant in the 2022 season. They won their first 11 games by at least 2 scores. They lost to Michigan to finish out the regular season, which some may thought would take them out of the college football playoff contention, but they still had an opportunity in the college football playoff. They went toe-to-toe with Georgia, came up just short, but this team's still an outstanding season to say the least. But how will this team be in 2023? That's what we'll be talking about here today. We'll be going over the players that this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and previewing their schedule for the first time this offseason. Let's get started looking at a quick recap of 2022. Once again, this team was dominant for their first 11 games. They were in college football playoff contention the entire season. Starting out with that Notre Dame win, won that game 21-10. They were dominant. If you look at the first month of action, massive wins over Arkansas State, beat Toledo 77-21, beat Wisconsin 52-21. And Wisconsin is a team that usually plays most Big Ten teams toe-to-toe, and it just was a down season for Wisconsin. But they blew out Michigan State on the road 49-20, beat Iowa at home 54-10. They beat Penn State on the road, which turned out to be a huge game there. That was a huge resume win for Ohio State. I think that win is pretty much one of the main reasons why this team still got into the college football playoff over Alabama, who was at number 5 in the end. Because Penn State quietly was actually one of the top teams in the country in 2022. They were kind of in the background, though, just because they did lose to both Ohio State and Michigan. But this team still in Penn State was definitely one of the top teams in the nation. And then they beat Northwestern, beat Indiana in dominant fashion, had that win over Maryland, which was closer than expected. But, of course, that Michigan game was definitely one where, both teams were very much thinking about that next week in week 12, and that Michigan game ended up being a loss 45-23. Michigan gets their second straight win over Ohio State in that game this past season. But at least this team still had an opportunity to play in the college football playoff. I think it was well deserved. If you look at the way that Ohio State played against Georgia, the Buckeyes were in control of that game until the fourth quarter. Georgia got a lead, and Ohio State had a chance for a field goal to get the win there and proceed to the national championship. And in the end, it didn't happen that way, but still 42-41 loss. And you look at the way that Georgia beat up TCU in the national championship game, I'd say Ohio State played Georgia pretty well. But looking forward to 2023 now. Let's look at your roster preview going to next season. There are some significant changes for the Buckeyes going to next season. CJ Stroud is gone, which is the big story, of course. He has been outstanding for this team the past couple of years. You look at this past season, 3,600 yards, 41 touchdowns, over 6 interceptions, 66% completion rate. Overall, outstanding stats. You could say his 2021 season was slightly better, but you also got to consider his receiving core in 2021 was just insane between Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, both receivers who have already excelled in the NFL. And then you got Jackson Smith and the Jigba in there, of course, as well. So that makes a big difference. But his stats were surely outstanding both years that he was the starting quarterback. And this season, considering the circumstances, Jackson Smith, the Jigba, was injured, which is so unfortunate for him because he could have had just a huge season yet again, but just didn't turn out that way. But the receiving core still, Ohio State is known for just producing just outstanding receivers, and this season was no different. Marvin Harrison Jr. received over 1,200 yards this season, nearly 1,304 touchdowns. You also got Emeka Egbuka, who was not far behind with 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns as well. And Julian Fleming, don't forget about him. He was the third receiver on this team with just over 500 yards and 6 touchdowns. The crazy thing is you actually return all 3 of those receivers going into next season. This team is going to be dangerous in the receiving core and offensively, looking at it from that aspect. But Jackson Smith, the Jigba, the big standout receiver for this team in the past, he is gone, but this team did do just fine without him this season, so I'm not too concerned. But can you imagine if Smith and the Jigba was healthy for the entirety of this season? I don't know if this offense would have been stoppable. For that matter, this was, honestly, I would argue that Ohio State had the best offense in the country this past season. Defensively, they were vulnerable at times, but offensively, this team was just brutal this season. You got a strong argument if you're saying Ohio State had the best offense in the nation. this past season. But they also got their top 2 running backs coming back between Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson, both who had big impacts on this team this past season. Mayan Williams being the top in the backfield with 850 total yards, 14 touchdowns. So, I mean, this team is dangerous. CJ Stroud is gone, but Kyle McCord is the next quarterback up, it appears. So we'll see how he plays. And if history has shown anything, it just shows that Ohio State they got tremendous depth at the quarterback position. I think they'll be just fine. They do lose 2 on the offensive line, 3 defensive linemen and 1 linebacker, and 4 in the secondary. So defensively, this team does need to reload, especially in the secondary and the defensive line. I am concerned about this defense. Offensively, I think this team is going to be just fine. They've got a chance to once again be one of, if not the best offense in the country in 2023. But when it comes to the defense does have a couple of question marks. But it brings up the question, chances for another college football playoff run in 2023? I think it's very much possible. Of course, I mean, the Big Ten, if you're looking at the Big Ten going into next season, the Big Ten West really doesn't have a major threat. I see Wisconsin and Iowa as the top 2 teams in that division. But if you're looking at the Big Ten East, I think it's going to be more of the same in 2023. I think Michigan looks great. I think Ohio State still looks great. Penn State should still be in contention. Maybe Penn State is a bit more competitive in 2023. It just depends on, Penn State's the most questionable team out of the top 3 between Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, just because, quarterback situation, offensively losing a couple. So I'd still say Ohio State and Michigan are the top 2 teams in the conference going into 2023. So it's just a matter of whether or not the Buckeyes can beat Michigan at the end of the season and hold things together during the regular season. That's kind of how it's been the past couple of years in the Big Ten East. But looking at the transfer portal and recruiting now going to next season, this team really hasn't been terribly active in the transfer portal in comparison to some teams, but here are your notable transfers. Davison Igbinosun, defensive back, is coming in from Ole Miss. Tristan Gebbia adds to the quarterback depth. He was one of the main starters for Oregon State at quarterback this past season. And before that, he was at Nebraska. So this is his 3rd destination in Gebbia. And then you got Jihad Carter coming in, safety from Syracuse. For the most part, though, that's really all of your notable transfers coming in. You do lose a few of your key players, especially on defense. Jansen Dunn is headed to Kentucky. Safety, defensive back J.K. Johnson is off to LSU. Javante Jean-Baptiste, linebackers off to Notre Dame. Mitchell, linebackers off to Florida, and Jalen Johnson, safeties off to Memphis. So this defense is questionable, to say the least. I mean, I am concerned about this defense a bit. I mean, if you compare Michigan and Ohio State, we'll be talking more about their matchup in a bit. But, I mean, Michigan as of right now just seems like the more complete team. I think Ohio State definitely has got the better offense. But defensively, I'm questioning this team. And so, I mean, maybe I'll be surprised, but this defense definitely has got some holes to fill as we look forward to 2023. Although the recruiting is nothing short of outstanding for Ohio State. They're 5th nationally, top team in the Big Ten. They got a 5-star coming in and 18 4-stars. So they got especially a lot of 4-stars coming in as we look forward to 2023. But now let's look at your schedule going to next season. You start off the season at Indiana. So you do have a road conference game to start off the season. But then again, Indiana is definitely one of the worst teams in the Big Ten right now. This team was relevant a couple of years ago, but they've just fallen off since. Then you got Youngstown State at home on the 9th, Western Kentucky on the 16th. Then you got Notre Dame on the road on the 23rd. That is going to be a big game there. I think Notre Dame next season could very much. I mean, they got Sam Hartman going in there. Notre Dame is an interesting team going into next season. I could see them being very much a contender. So I think that's going to be a tough one there on September 23rd, one to mark on your calendar. Maryland then after your bye week, and then you got Purdue on the road, Penn State at home, big game there, and then Wisconsin on the road to finish out October. Then in November, you got Rutgers on the road, Michigan State at home, Minnesota at home, and then Michigan on the road. Huge game there once again this season. And that's going to finish out the regular season. So let's look at September here. Indiana on the road. I'm going to put that in green. I think Ohio State takes control and wins that game. But it is dangerous going on the road, especially in week 1. I mean, we've seen that many times in the past. A team that's got high expectations heading into a season disappoints a bit in week 1 if they have to go on the road. So, I mean, that is a game to take seriously there. That is important that you get a good win there in week 1. Then Youngstown State, Western Kentucky, both easy wins, I think. Notre Dame on the road. This will be one of the more crucial games in September, that's for sure. I mean, you got two excellent football teams here. We saw Ohio State win it in week 1 last year. Now it's in South Bend. Notre Dame going to next season. Sam Hartman, this is going to be his first big statement game. And this is where we're going to see what Notre Dame truly is. And so Notre Dame is a really intriguing team. Ohio State's offense is brutal. But I honestly want to favor Notre Dame in that matchup right now. I mean, that's going to be an important game. Could be in prime time, in a night game in South Bend. That's going to be a tough one to win there for Ohio State. I think the Buckeyes can do it. But Notre Dame right now, I do want to favor them. I'm not saying they're going to win that game, but I will be favoring them right now. So the ceiling is 4-0 for sure for Ohio State heading into October. The floor is 3-1. That is the worst that I think you could possibly be. But looking at October here, Maryland, I'd say that's a game where I'd favor Ohio State, but I will be putting it in yellow, meaning I do think Maryland puts up a fight. I think Maryland could be pretty good next season. I like how they're looking. Offense looks pretty good. So I think Maryland's a team that could be an 8-win team next season. So you do want to pay attention to that. Plus, the Terps did play Ohio State pretty well last season. Then you got Purdue on the road. I think Purdue's going to fall off this next season. I mean, if anything shows, I mean, you look at that Purdue game that they played. The Purdue, I think it was, they were playing LSU in their bowl game, just got destroyed without Aiden O'Connell and Jeff Brom. So we'll see how Purdue does. I think they fall off quite a bit. That should be an easy win there for Ohio State there on October 14th. Then Penn State, Wisconsin, two important games against two teams I could see being pretty good, especially Penn State. So Penn State, that's a tough one, but I do think you beat the Nittany Lions. You got them at home. I'll favor them right now. And then Wisconsin on the road. This one's also a tough one. I'm going to favor Ohio State there, even though I think Wisconsin is a team that could very much be a contender once again in the Big Ten in the near future. Whether that's 2023, 2024, we'll see. But, I mean, that's a team that I still think, I mean, with Luke Fickell as their head coach now, they should be right back to being a relevant team sometime soon. 2022 was just a down season for Wisconsin, just one down year, I think. So ceiling is still 8-0, undefeated. Floor is 6-2 heading into November. You got Rutgers on the road. You'll beat them, I think, pretty easily. Rutgers is just a bottom tier opponent in the Big Ten. Then Michigan State at home. I think that could be a closer one. You got them at home, though. I think I'll favor you there. And Michigan State, I mean, I think they'll be better in 2023 versus 2022. They were just a straight-up disappointment in 2022. And then Minnesota should take care of them. I got multiple question marks about Minnesota. I don't think they're going to be too good in 2023. And then Michigan on the road to finish out the regular season. I mean, this one's tough. It's in Ann Arbor. I mean, it's so far away. You can't even have an accurate prediction on that game right now. But as of right now, I will probably favor Michigan just because they're at home. I do think they're the more complete team between Ohio State and Michigan. As I mentioned before, I think Ohio State's got the better offense for sure. This offense could easily return to being the top team in the country. Once again, I consider this offense to be the best in the country this past season, but defensively they were a bit vulnerable, and they were simply going up against opponents that were just more complete than they were. So, especially if you look at the college football playoff, Georgia was just barely the better team, and Michigan they just straight up beat them in 2022. So looking at Michigan, it's tough right now. It's so far away, you can hardly predict it, but I'll favor the Wolverines for now. So ceiling is still 12-0. I could see this team going undefeated. The floor is 9-3. That's the worst that you could possibly be. So I don't think you got a terribly low floor. This team should at least get 10 wins, I'd say, in the 2023 season. Potentially 9-3 if things don't go as expected. But in the end, I think 11 wins, 11-12 wins is very much an accurate ballpark for the Buckeyes going into next season. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Ohio State, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.